Hi and welcome to Risk Management. Today obviously I'd like to talk to you about risk management because as a fitness instructor or working for a fitness centre, that fitness centre and also you as the instructor are going to have exposure to risk. And it's important from a financial, legal and ethical point of view that you do whatever you can to minimise the likelihood of risks occurring and therefore providing a safe working environment not only for yourself but also for the exercising public. First point I'd like to talk about is risk. And what is risk? As identified, risk is a loss of control of energy. Now in your workbook I use the example of a gym mirror and I'm going to do the same today. Let's assume that this whiteboard is a gym mirror attached to a gym wall. It is fitted securely, however it does have potential energy. That means even though it's fitted securely, if the fittings for some reason were to become loose or dislodged and that mirror fell, that potential energy or stored energy would get converted to movement or kinetic energy. Now movement and kinetic energy is not necessarily a bad thing. That's the energy we use to achieve our exercise goals. However, it can be a bad thing if we've lost control over it. And that's the example of what's happening here. Potential energy, nice and secure. The fittings have become dislodged. Security is lost. The mirror falls. The potential energy is converted to movement or kinetic energy. We have lost control over that. The outcome could be as minor as some general floor damage or as severe as serious injury to an exercising client. Risks can be eliminated or minimised. It should be your first priority to eliminate risk as much as practically possible. If that can't be done, then the risk would need to be minimised, again, as much as practically possible. Now to give you an example of how to eliminate a risk, let's say for example the fitness centre that you're working for is performing a mass evacuation for whatever reason. The fire exit door, which is the door to the external areas, has a very large rock immediately behind it. You're performing this mass evacuation. The exercising client tell the exercise public they run outside this door, and a lot of people run straight into this rock that they did not know was there because it was immediately in the vicinity of the exit area. People get injured because they ran into this rock. That is a risk that can be eliminated. That risk can be completely eliminated by removing the rock, ensuring a nice clear exit way in case of a mass evacuation being required. However, risks, as mentioned, cannot always be eliminated. In that example, there's a need for them to be minimised as much as practically possible. Now, a common example in the health and fitness industry is screening clients. Now, as we know, exercise carries with it an inherent risk from participation. You do achieve your wonderful health and well-being outcomes, but in doing so, you are putting yourself at a little bit of risk in achieving those goals. Exercise involves stress to the body that it may not be accustomed to or used to, and that could pose potential injury for somebody who may not be aware that they do have an ailment or are unsure about the exercise that they're undertaking. Health centres do whatever they can to try and minimise the likelihood of that occurring. They do so by doing pre-exercise evaluations or pre-exercise questionnaires where the client has the opportunity to identify any potential health issues that they may have that could limit their participation in exercise. And if any issues are presented, that client may be required to seek medical approval before engaging in any form of exercise. A fitness assessment is done. Involved in that process is blood pressure analysis. That may identify any cardiovascular risk that the client may have. In that example, again, medical referral may need to be sought. Waivers and exclusions. These allow the health and fitness centre the opportunity to identify to the client that exercise does carry with it inherent risk, in case they were unaware of that. And that allows the client the opportunity to identify any concerns that they may think are relevant that may not have come up prior to or during the screening process to date. And of course you as the instructor have the opportunity to speak daily with your client prior to exercise participation to see if there's any issues that they may have that may just be a recent occurrence or a recent incidents that have occurred to them. In that case, you may be able to make modifications or make recommendations on participation based on the information that your client gives. In this case, the Health and Fitness Centre is doing what's practically possible to minimise the risk from exercise participation, but that risk cannot be eliminated because there exists an inherent risk from participation in exercise. Okay, risk analysis. Consequences versus likelihood. In the next slide, I'm going to talk to you about the risk management process, the steps that should be taken as part of a risk management plan. By and large, the major step is analysis of risks. Once you know what those risks are, analysing those risks and making appropriate recommendation based on the outcomes for that. Now in your workbook, we've used a practical example using two continuums and two graphs, putting into quadrants to identify risks and potential issues that come from those risks. Okay. We'll have frequency as one continuum, and we have high and low. And the other continuum is severity. Now I've used a couple of different terms, and the reason for that is because you will see a lot of models for risk management, risk analysis, and a lot of the terms are just simply interchangeable. In this example, we're using consequences versus likelihood. This is no different. We're just using frequency versus severity. Now let's go back to the gym mirror example. What is the likelihood or the frequency of that gym mirror becoming dislodged and falling onto the ground? And if so, what is the consequences from that if it was to occur? Now, our immediate analysis might suggest that the frequency of this occurring, or the likelihood of this occurring, is quite low. Now when I say our initial analysis, what I'm referring to is during this process, it's a very good idea to sit down with other colleagues, other fitness professionals, your supervisors, your immediate managers, and discuss openly the types of risks that are confronting your health and fitness centre, identifying those risks as much as practically possible, then talking at length about the likelihood of that occurring, and if so, the severity of that occurring. The reason for that is because risk analysis, or the risk analysis process, is merely a process of educated guesses. Sitting down with a lot of people with a lot of experience and drawing on that wealth of experience, you can come up with a more accurate representation of likelihood of an event occurring and the consequences if that event was to occur. So sitting down with colleagues, managers and supervisors is a very good process to go through to ensure that this process is done as accurately as possible. Now, when we assess the severity of a risk outcome, we want to look at the worst possible outcome. Now, if a gym mirror was to fall off the wall, the lowest possible outcome would be a bit of floor damage. The worst possible outcome, we're probably looking at serious injury, particularly if a member of the public was exercising directly underneath that mirror. So in that example, we might assess the outcome to be quite high. Okay. As we're having some discussions with our colleagues and with our supervisors, we might find out that we don't really do anything proactive to minimise the likelihood or the frequency of the mirror falling. We might have some discussion and find out that we don't daily inspect the fixtures. We don't know if a qualified tradesman put the mirror up. We don't know if there's better fixtures available to ensure greater security. We don't discourage patrons from leaning on the mirror and putting pressure on the mirror. Once all this knowledge comes to hand, we might find that we might revise our initial rating. We might think, yeah, it's a very low occurrence of happening, very low likelihood or frequency, but we may even decide to increase the likelihood or the frequency of this occurring based on this information, based on the fact that we don't do these daily inspections. We don't advise clients not to lean against the mirror. So as a result, we can review or change our initial estimation. What we do from there is we just join the 2 points. Where they meet, that is the analysis of our risk, and that forms a good framework to prioritise the risk as either being urgent, needing immediate attention, being moderate or medium level urgency, or being a low level priority. Now this is the same, as mentioned, this is the same as in your workbook. So what we do in our workbook example is we draw the 4 quadrants. Okay, and in this top quadrant we have a high risk, which requires urgent attention. The reason that's a high risk is because there's a high likelihood or a high frequency of occurrence, and the severity of outcomes can be quite high. So it needs immediate attention. Vice versa, the bottom quadrant is low. Low likelihood of occurrence or low frequency, and low severity of outcomes. The other 2 quadrants are moderate. That is, it has a high likelihood of occurring, but the consequences are not so severe. Or in the example of the gym mirror, has quite a low likelihood of occurring, but the consequences could be quite severe. So this process forms the risk analysis process that needs to be undertaken once risks are identified to you. And that leads on to the next slide. The risk management plan, or the risk management process. First point is risk identification. And like the risk analysis, this is a process where you want to sit down with some colleagues, supervisors, managers, and try to identify all the possible risks that can occur in an exercising environment. Good place to start is looking at both the environment and administration to identify as many potential risks as possible. The environment is your immediate working environment or the immediate exercise environment. Common environmental risks include weight training equipment or exercise equipment not being appropriately stored or left lying out after use. An exercise environment not being very comfortable in terms of no air conditioning, very hot, humid, ventilation isn't adequate, no access to hydration, too many people using the equipment or too many people on the gym floor at once, creating moving hazards. These are environmental potential risks or work environment potential risks. The second category is administrative risks. And administrative risks might be inconsistency in screening processes, first aid qualification lapsing of an instructor not registered with Fitness Australia, or instructor not appropriately qualified. They're more administrative or paper-based risks. And these 2 areas is a good place to start when you're doing your initial risk identification. Looking at the work environment and looking at the processes behind the work environment that ensure that risks are minimised as much as practically possible or eliminated where possible. Risk assessment is the next process or the next step in the risk management plan. We have gone through a risk assessment process with the gym mirror. We've decided it has a low frequency but a high severity of outcomes. And that leads into the next point, which is prioritisation of risks. If the gym mirror incident fell in the high priority quadrant, that would become a high priority risk needing urgent or immediate attention. If we found that the gym mirror fell into the low priority quadrant, low likelihood of occurring and low severity of outcomes, then it would be a second priority risks. Part of the risk management process is once they've been assessed as their level of severity versus their level of likelihood, we can categorise them as a priority. Low, moderate, high. And an activity that you have to do in your student workbook relies on a different model but allows you to do the same process to assess risk and give them a priority in terms of urgency for attention. From that we develop strategies to implement. Now we've already done that with the gym mirror. We've found initial estimates to be quite low in terms of likelihood of occurrence. But as we've discussed it further, we've found out that we don't do a lot to ensure the low likelihood of it occurring. That is, we don't do daily inspections. We haven't checked to see if a qualified tradesman actually put the mirror up. We haven't checked if there are better products on the market that will ensure greater security. We haven't put up any signs that will advise his clients not to put any pressure or lean against the mirror. And we haven't advised the fitness instructors to ensure compliance with that rule or regulation. As a result, the frequency or likelihood increased. Part of the risk management plan is developing strategies and implementing those strategies to minimise or eliminate risk. So in this example, we put signs up advising clients not to lean on the mirror. One of the daily duties of the fitness instructor is now to inspect the attachment of that mirror to the wall, and also to ensure compliance of clients not leaning against the mirror. As a result, we can revise our initial analysis of the risk. That risk could be further revised to give it a lower likelihood of occurrence, which was our initial estimate. As a result, we refine our analysis. We still have a moderate risk rating. That is, the severity of outcomes is still quite high, and that's often a variable that you won't be able to affect much with the risk management plan. But a variable that is conducive to a lot of change is the frequency or likelihood of occurrence. And in this example, we reduce the likelihood of this risk occurring quite substantially through those proactive processes of ensuring a secure attachment of that mirror to the wall. And of course, the last step of any plan should be the evaluation. Has it worked? Has the plan achieved its outcomes? By saying that, we need to look at any incidents that have occurred since implementation of the plan. We need to look at compliance of the plan by appropriate personnel, and any near misses that may have occurred. Therefore, we can identify further risks or identify further modifications that we can take part of to ensure that we minimise risks as practically possible, if not eliminate it, which should be our first priority. Okay. Again, this is the model in your workbook. One of the activities that you have to do requires on a different model, a different activity, which is taken straight from your text, the essential guide. But also, don't be surprised if you see a lot of different models during your work experience or life experience. What you'll find is that they'll all basically have this process in place. It will all involve looking at consequence versus likelihood and coming up with a priority and timeline for implementation. I'll give you another example of another one or another risk management process that you might see quite commonly once working in the industry. Okay, we'll have frequency as high, to low. Ooh. We'll have severity as high. Sorry, we'll swap that around. We'll have severity low to high. And here we'll have a big priority continuum that extends all the way down from low to high. And what we do now during this process is the same thing. We do a thorough analysis of the risk to see the likelihood or the frequency of it occurring versus the severity of outcomes or the consequences that could be expected in worst case situation. So for example, if we have a likelihood of something occurring to be quite high and the severity or the consequences to be quite high, we just identify somewhere on the continuum where that's going to occur. We draw a line through those dots and through the priority continuum. And as you can see, where it intersects the priority continuum, P for priority, it results in a high priority. And that's to be expected. If something's got a high frequency or a high likelihood and a high severity of outcomes or high level consequences, it's going to be a high priority risk. And vice versa. a low likelihood or a low frequency of occurrence versus low severity or low consequences. Drawing a line through the graphs, it's going to intersect our priority continuum quite low. So it's not going to be as an urgent priority. Again, priorities involve high priority meaning urgent or immediate attention, low priority are not as urgent and they become second priority risks that need to be addressed. And again, all we've done here is risk assessment, prioritisation of risk using a different model. Again, that was different to the one in your workbook, and again is different to the one that you need to do as part of your assessment activities for this class. Okay, occupational health and safety. Now, the fitness centre that you work for as a fitness instructor has the legal responsibility to provide a safe environment for you to work within. Now, I know over the course of this class, law, the environment and workplace risk management, we've talked almost exclusively about how do we minimise risk for the exercise in public. How do we alleviate risks and how do we ensure that we provide the safe environment for the public so we're not negligent in any way. Now, the same attention, the same priority has to be focused towards you as the instructor, as the employee. Now, during the risk management plan or the risk management process that we overviewed recently, we went through steps involved in identifying risks, analysing risks and prioritising risks based on their frequency and their likelihood and the severity of outcomes. Now, the same process needs to be undertaken for you as the health and fitness instructor. I'll give you an example. When you have a committee or when you have a group of people meeting, looking at risks and prioritising risks, it's also important that you have an occupational health and safety committee present as well. Most organisations and most health and fitness centres will have a group of people that form an occupational health and safety committee, and they need to be present during the risk management process to look at risks not from the public point of view, but from the employee point of view. We'll give you an example. Let's look at equipment. Weight training equipment that's left on the floor because people haven't put it away after use. That creates a trip hazard to the exercising public. However, one of the roles or one of the ways to eliminate that risk or minimise that risk might be to make sure that the instructor replaces that equipment regularly to minimise trip hazards. What the Occupational Health and Safety Committee will now have to do is analyse that role of the fitness instructor and how it impacts on their health and safety. Is that a role that's putting them at risk? And the answer is quite probably yes. If people are not putting weights away regularly, and the fitness instructor is required to do that regularly, doing a lot of bending and lifting, they could be putting themselves at injury risk, which is an occupational health and safety issue. Now, as mentioned before, it is a legal requirement that you work in a safe working environment. It's mandated by policy, the Occupational Health and Safety Policy Act of 1989. And you're also covered by occupational health and safety policies in case you injure yourself on the job. That's also a requirement. Now, we might find that the fitness instructor who's repetitively lifting these weights off the floor is putting themselves at injury risk. So what the Occupational Health and Safety Committee need to do is look at how they can minimise the likelihood of risk or injury occurring to you as the instructor. And some simple options may be, number one, to put signs up advising clients that when they're finished using their weights, they are responsible for putting them away. And maybe conducting workshops to coach instructors or just to refresh the instructor's memory on appropriate lifting technique using legs and not so much the lower back. Or it may be a process of looking at the storage of equipment. You may find that the fitness instructor has to bend over regularly to pick up the weight and then have to bend over again to put the weight back in a low level area, requiring a lot of bending. You may look at the storage options, and it may be better to have storage more at waist level. So the instructor bends over and picks the weight up from the floor, but doesn't have to bend over again. They can put the equipment back at storage at waist level as opposed to lower to the ground. These options allow the activities of the instructor to be reviewed and looked at from an occupational health and safety point of view to ensure the safety and well-being of the instructor and not just the exercising public. In your workbooks, talk in a lot of detail about the different occupational and health and safety issues that you need to be aware of, that you need to have in your attention. But most commonly, we find that there's three main areas of occupational and health and safety concern that you need to be aware of as an fitness instructor. First one is equipment. Substance. And environment. Now this is not an exhaustive list. There's a lot more detail in your student notes about the sort of occupational health and safety issues that you need to be concerned about as an employee. But generally speaking, we find that there's three main categories of risk that you may be exposed to as an employee. Equipment. And the example that we've used already is the storage of equipment and making sure that you're eliminating trip hazards, but doing so by not putting yourself at risk. Substance. Often maintenance procedures of equipment require the use of silicone spray, which is a lubricant for moving parts. Now silicone spray has been shown to be quite carcinogenic. That is, it does contain cancer-causing agents. So the appropriate use of this substance is using it with a face mask, some goggles, a pair of gloves, using it in a well-ventilated area and away from the general public. So ensure that if you're using this substance that you do have access to these resources and you're using these resources as part of your maintenance procedure. Also, you may have exposure to blood or sweat, and we want to prevent the risk of biological hazard through body fluids. So looking at cleaning processes for when sweat or blood is spilt on equipment. And that involves encouraging clients or mandating clients to use towels on exercising equipment. And the environment, general workplace environment. What's the accessibility like? What's the office like? What is the amount of people on the gym floor like? What is the dynamics or the setup of the fitness assessment room? Is it conducive to efficient workspaces? And does it allow you to work in a safe environment free from hazards? Now I know I spoke on these quite quickly. In your notes there's some more information regarding that. But again, if your priority is obviously going to be the health and safety of your clients, it also has to be the same for yourself. And if any issues come up that compromises your health and safety on the job, your supervisors and managers need to be alerted to this because they would encourage that feedback. Because one of the things that they want to do to ensure that they're providing a fantastic service to the community is not only a safe environment for the community and a very good environment for the community to achieve their goals, but also a very safe and enjoyable working environment for you, the instructor, which is basically the people at the coalface making the goals addressed of the community members. Thank you for your time and good luck with your studies.